We had this brilliant idea to start a video arcade because we really knew what games were popular.
Yeah. And also we were video game experts at 14 and 15. And the reason we had to stop was because we went to the city to get a code variance, and you need to be 18 to sign, and we had never told our parents. And we already had a lease, we had games coming, and when the parents found out, they put a stop to it, which is a real bummer because it would have been very successful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that wasn't the final barrier to success. But that was the first time that you worked together as brothers, and eventually that led to a company called Zip2.
Right.
I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking about Zip2. How did it come about? What was the idea? What was the whole process like for you?
Sure. Well, and Kimball, do you want to start off, or should it?
Well, I mean, I would start with the road trip.
The road trip. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a year before, this is '94. Elon was working at some video game company there's a theme here.
What? Yeah. I was actually I was doing two jobs. One was at a video game company that was ironically called Rocket Science, and then working on ultra capacitors during the day for electric cars.
And so we went on a road trip from Silicon Valley to Philadelphia, and that was in '94, and we were both, I'm younger than Elon, but we were both finishing school at the same time, because I'm much smarter than him. Elon actually was doing a double major, so that's why. But anyway, so we ended up doing that, and we started with a network medical database. Remember that?
Yeah. Well, there were a bunch of iterations,
Yeah.
but I think the thought in '95 was that the internet was going to be something really that fundamentally changed humanity. It was like humanity acquiring a nervous system. You know, previously people would communicate information almost by osmosis relative to how the internet works. You know, if you wanted to have access to a lot of information, like you'd go to the Library of Congress, but unless you were physically where the books were, you didn't have access to that information. But with the internet, you could be anywhere in the world, and if you're connected to the internet, you have access to all the world's information. So it was really just like humanity was almost becoming like a superorganism with a nervous system. So we wanted to be part of, building some elements of that. And
it was a funny time because it made so much sense to us, but we literally had a guy throw a Yellow Pages book at us. He was a very senior executive, and tell us, do you ever really think the internet is going to replace this?
Yeah.
And literally, and you're kind of looking at them going, this guy's screwed.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't, and people didn't know what the internet was.
Yeah.
Including in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was something that universities and the government used, and nobody was really doing anything on it, and you certainly couldn't make money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Did you know that you were onto something right away, or did people just think you were crazy and pursuing some bizarre dream? When did it occur to you that Zip2 might be a success?
Well, I mean, when we first started out, I think our ambitions were really quite low. It was really to make enough money to pay the rent.
Yeah, we got a VC give us money. That was,
yay! Yeah.
We thought it was all over then.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I mean, when we started out in '95, we literally, at the beginning, we had one computer, which would be the web server during the day, and then at night, I'd program on it. And
we'd sleep in the office.
Yeah,
we couldn't afford to have an apartment.
It was cheaper to rent the office than to rent an apartment, so we just rented the office and slept in the office and showered at the YMCA.
Showered at the YMCA. And for me, the worst part was eating at Jack in the Box 3 times a day.
Yeah, man, this I'll sleep. It's really difficult to get food at Palo Alto after 10 p.m. It's like Jack in the Box and a few other options. So we rotated through the Jack in the Box menu.
I remember the one time I was literally at Jack in the Box. Hopefully you guys aren't, whoever's from the company's not here. And it was one of those like 3 a.m. things, and I took a milkshake, and I was so tired, and there was something in the milkshake, and I literally went like this.
Yeah,
that's your standards just dropped to nothing.
yeah. So we're through the end of '95. Where that's essentially we're just sleeping in the office and showering at the YMCA, and then around the end of '95 is when Netscape went public, and then whether or not somebody knew what the internet was, they knew that you could make money on the internet somehow, or even if it's only on the greater fool theory. So when we went and talked to venture capitalists in early '96, there was a much greater interest in what we were doing. In fact, the round closed in like maybe a week or something.
It was crazy. Yeah, we went from sleeping in the office to people throwing, I mean, again, this is a financial crowd, so you guys see these numbers every day, but for us to hear, we'll give you $3 million.
Yeah, it sounded extremely, we thought they were crazy. Like, why would they do that?
It was literally like, these people are insane.
They obviously do not realize we're sleeping in the office.
In fact, when they did fund us, they realized that we were illegal immigrants.
Well, I mean,
yes, we were.
I'd say it was a gray area.
Yeah, yes, we were. We were illegal immigrants. We were sleeping in the office. We didn't have a car. We had one car, but the wheel kept falling off.
But, well, actually, yeah, the wheel did actually fall off the car.
Yes, exactly. And the venture capitalists actually bought us cars.
Yeah, well, they gave us 40 grand.
It was 40 grand to go buy cars, which was, at the time was more money than we'd ever seen.
Yeah, and I bought I spent $35K on a Series 1 67 Jaguar E-Type.
Which didn't drive, but he got what he wanted.
Yeah, it looked really great by the side of the road.
He got it. He was driving it home from the dealer, and it broke down, and he had to actually come to the house on a flatbed truck.
Right. It didn't improve from there. I mean, it was really brutal.
Should have kept the truck.
Yeah.
It reminds me in some ways of, eBay went public in 1998, and we had kind of the scrappy startup mentality as well. And the first time I ever saw Elon on TV was when you took delivery of a McLaren supercar.
That's right. Yeah. Right.
So presumably somewhere between sleeping on the floor of the office and the McLaren, something happened.
Yeah. So at Zip2, we basically created software to help bring the media companies online. So it was sort of internet publishing software. It was the Yellow Pages, White Pages, maps and directions, that kind of thing, and we helped bring some of the major media companies online, or at least a portion of what their online presence was. And so we had as customers and investors, New York Times Company, Knight Ridder, Hearst, and most of the major media companies. And then
in fact, the guy that threw the telephone book at us eventually became an investor.
Yeah.
Right, and then the company sold to Compaq for a little over $300 million.
Yeah.
Circa 1999, late 90s.
Yeah, that's right. It was the deal was sort of struck late '98 and it concluded early '99.
Yeah. And so then what happens to you guys? I mean, at that point you're 23, 24 years old, give or take, and you've gone from being barely able to pay the rent to having substantial resources. How did that influence your paths in what you did next?
The way I like to think about it is I was like a dog in a cage getting beaten for 4 years, and then they let me out and here are all the T-bones you can eat. So it was a very weird experience, actually, because you don't think, I thought I was building that company for life, and then boom, they give you lots and lots of money in easy to carry bags, and it was totally surreal.
And what did you do?
So I went to New York. So I was done with Silicon Valley. I think technology is my brother's thing. He loves it, and I enjoy it too. But honestly, for me, food is what I've always been passionate since I was a kid. I was the cook in the family, and
it's ironic. He's much thinner than I am.
It's true. I can eat anything. Although I'm finding out as you get older, it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah.
But no, so I went to New York and I learned to cook. I went to the, I was young and I figured, what else do you do when you have enough financial resources to do whatever you want? And I always wanted to learn to cook, so I enrolled in cooking schools, one of the top schools in the country in New York City, and had this incredible experience of cooking with some of the best, most talented chefs in the world. And it was a unique circumstance for me personally because I was there in New York during 9/11, and I graduated from cooking school just before 9/11, and I lived right by the World Trade Center, so I saw everything happen. It was a very big event in my life. But what the rare opportunity it gave me was the opportunity to cook for the firefighters. So I spent 6 weeks at ground zero cooking for the firefighters, and that's when I I always loved food, but my passion for community and connecting people to each other through food was just I literally couldn't even describe how incredible this experience was. And so I came out of that with a very strong intention to start a restaurant. And having been part of a company that just sold for $300 million and investing in PayPal, which at the time was worth billions of dollars, doing a restaurant was a weird decision, but for me it was the right decision.
So for you, it unlocked a path to dreams that maybe you had beforehand, or just opportunistically you just said, this is what I want to do, and you still not only run the restaurant you began, but there's more to it.
Yeah, well, do you mean the nonprofit, or do you mean?
No, I mean just in terms of there are more than one restaurant.
Oh yeah, sure. So turns out I'm actually pretty good at cooking. I didn't really know I was good at cooking, but when I opened the restaurant I had two partners, Hugo and Jan, opened the restaurant. We were supposed to do 60 people a night, and it was just going to be this side project for me because I was still involved in Elon's companies, Tesla and SpaceX. And today we serve 10,000 people a week. And it's just continues to grow.
Elon, for you, Zip2 happened, you sold it, and
and bought the McLaren, yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, you invested most of that money into your next venture, X.com.
That's right. Most of the funds went into X.com, which was later renamed PayPal, and that worked out pretty well.
It worked out pretty well, but looking back on it, because you put a lot of your eggs in that basket, would you advise entrepreneurs to roll the bones quite the way you did?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think it's worth investing your own capital in what you do. I don't believe in the sort of other people's money thing. I think if you're not willing to put your own assets at stake, then you shouldn't ask other people to do that.
So eBay comes along, buys PayPal, and then I remember 2003, give or take, meeting Elon at a coffee shop in Palo Alto. This was not long after the PayPal deal had closed. And I said to Elon, what would you like to do next? And you had 3 things to say.
Right.
Do you remember what they were?
Yeah. But yeah, they're basically, space, solar, and electric cars.
Space, solar, and electric cars, yes, 2 points.
But yeah.
Wait, space, electric cars, what was the middle one?
I asked Elon what he wanted to do, and he said he wanted to do something in solar power. He wanted to colonize Mars eventually, but to get there by building a rocket business, a sustainable business, and building electric cars. And let's talk a little bit about Mars.
Okay.
So where did this come from? When did you have that dream? How did that come to be?
I guess when I was in college, I thought about things that would most affect the future of humanity, and there were 3 areas that I thought would have the biggest impact, and those were the internet, sustainable energy, of which solar power is the production side, and electric cars the consumption side, and then humanity becoming a multi-planet species. I think our future will fundamentally bifurcate to one where we are a space-faring civilization, or one where we are confined to Earth until some eventual extinction event. Although I'm quite optimistic about life on Earth, I should point out. I don't want to. Sometimes people think that by that I expect some imminent catastrophe, but I think that the probable outcome for civilization on Earth is quite good for a long time. But I still think that we should try to extend life beyond Earth and and the thing to do is to establish a base on Mars, and try to make that a self-sustaining base as soon as possible. So I don't expect that SpaceX is going to do that sort of single-handedly, but I think we're going to try to advance the technology of space travel to the point where we can at least send some number of people to Mars, which is not currently possible.
As I recall, when
follow-up question, Jeff.
when SpaceX started, I think the first 3 rocket launches weren't successful.
Yeah.
And the 4th one was. What would have happened if the 4th one hadn't worked?
We would have failed. Yeah.
But let's talk about one of the failures were spectacular. I would go out to the island, Kwajalein, with Elon, and seeing giant exploding rockets is quite an amazing sight. And I was one of the early investors in SpaceX, and I said, you know what? If all I get to do is to see these rockets explode, well worth every dime I put into this company.
There's something to be said about brotherly support.
But it was an amazing thing to watch what Elon had built with those rockets on a shoestring in the middle of nowhere, and literally the middle of the Pacific, 2,000 miles from Hawaii. That experience, we'd fly in these what are they called? What are those
Hueys?
helicopters? Hueys. You're flying the Hueys. You feel like you're right out of Apocalypse Now, flying to Dr. Evil's island. Really amazing. And again, worth every penny, still to this day, I'd say. So I think the failures were actually unbelievably exciting to be part of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Elon.
You're welcome.
The point being that these ventures now seem to have a wonderful momentum and things are going well, but I remember there was a point in time when each of them had their tipping point and could have gone either way. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the origins of Tesla.
Sure. So with as mentioned, I was quite interested in electric cars from when I was doing my undergrad physics, and in fact, I originally came out to California to do a PhD at Stanford in applied physics and material science to work on ultracapacitors in electric cars. So it was a long-standing interest of mine, and the internet kind of put that on hold for a few years. But then after PayPal, I decided I wanted to get back into electric vehicles and make something happen in that arena, particularly since GM had come out with the EV1, and I thought, okay, well, there's not really a need for a startup company to develop electric cars, because obviously GM is going to create the EV2 and the EV3. That's a logical sequence, and we get increasingly get better and better with each iteration, and so not really need for a new company in that arena. But actually what happened was that after California changed the regulations to no longer require electric cars, GM recalled all the EV1s, and then just to make sure that nobody could get them back, they crushed them in a lot somewhere. And in fact, while they were being crushed, the people who'd been the EV1 owners who did not want those cars recalled actually held a candlelit vigil as though somebody was getting executed, basically. And it's like, that just seemed extremely crazy that GM would ignore this, because it's quite rare for people to hold a candlelit vigil about a product. And particularly a GM product. So, so if people are doing that, you should really pay attention. But they wanted to just sort of erase all that, and so I thought, okay, well, we've got to try to create an electric car company. But it wasn't as though in creating these companies that we thought that we would be successful. I thought that the most likely outcome was failure. But it was still worth doing, even though the odds of success were low. In fact, even for SpaceX, originally what I started doing was not creating a rocket company, but actually was going to do a small mission to Mars, which was just a philanthropic mission where you would send a small greenhouse with seeds and dehydrated gel, and would, upon landing, hydrate the gel, and you'd have this cool picture of green plants on a red background. And the public tends to respond to precedents and superlatives. So this would be the first life on Mars, furthest that life's ever traveled, and you'd have this great money shot of green plants on a red background. So yeah, I thought that would get people's attention. So, but the expectation for that was no return. So I thought we wouldn't get any, we'd just spend the money on that and it wouldn't happen. And it was in the process of trying to do that mission that I concluded that I'd made a mistake with respect to my assumptions about why are there no people on Mars. Because I started off thinking that it was because there was a lack of will, and that if you could reignite the will, then it would happen. So my initial thing even with the space side was really to get the public excited and to get people to essentially vote NASA to have a bigger budget. That was my goal initially. But as I tried to do that mission, I was able to compress the costs of the satellite or the spacecraft and the greenhouse and everything and the communication costs, but I wasn't able to compress the rocket costs. And I actually tried, had some adventures along the way trying to get a good deal on rockets. I actually flew to Russia 3 times to try to buy some ICBMs. And I negotiated a deal too, actually. But after the 3rd trip to Russia, it was very, very strange because I was like there in 2001, 2002, and I thought, well, if we do this, well, it's going to generate a lot of interest, but if there's still a fundamental technology issue with rocket transport, then it's not going to solve the problem. So I decided that it was not a question of will, it was a question of way. And if people thought there was a way to do it without it fundamentally affecting their standard of living, then they would support such an endeavor, particularly in the United States, which the United States is a nation of explorers. I mean, it's a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. People came here from other places, and so I think that exploratory spirit is actually very strong. But people need to know that it's possible, this can be done without materially affecting their standard of living. So,
I mean, what you've accomplished is amazing. Between linking up with the space station on launches and the Model S winning Car of the Year and being just a phenomenon. But a good, yes. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing, and we'll come back and talk about Solar City in a second. But you mentioned gardens, and I think that's a natural segue. We're surrounded by some beautiful gardens here on stage.
Yeah, an opportunity. Seriously, let me say this to you. If you're going to come to Europe with Tesla, we will compete with the best.
Okay.
So if you're going to do that, you give us a chance. We'll give you
Absolutely.
a fair hearing, and our workers will not let you down, believe you me.
All right.
There you go.
Okay, let's keep that between ourselves. I just want to also could we get some water up here? I don't want our guests to die of dehydration before we get to the end of our session here, but if we can get some water on stage. But I just want to go back, Elon, to your years growing up when obviously 12 years old, I think you sold your first video game that you had programmed.
Yeah.
But at what point in your teenage years was there a light bulb moment where you said, I really do want to change the world?
Teenage years, maybe I was probably like 21 or something like that. So it was like a little beyond teenage years. I mean, when I was a teenager, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I liked playing video games and I liked writing software, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll professionally write video game software. That seemed like a pretty fun thing. And then when I was in college, I just started thinking about, well, what's going to most affect the world? And there were actually I thought there were 5 things that I thought would most affect the world, 3 of which I thought would definitely be positive things to solve, 2 of which are a slight question mark. And then as it turned out, I was able to get involved in all 3 of those things, being the internet, sustainable energy, and space.
Now, obviously, you revolutionized online payments, but after PayPal, other innovators might have moved on into the same area to have another success. You chose a completely different set of challenges to address. I mean, space. What was the thinking there? Why did you just follow your money back into online commerce, for example?
I guess the thing that motivated me there was that I kept expecting that there'd be a manned mission to Mars. That was the continuation of the dream of Apollo. We went to the moon, then there was supposed to be a base on the moon, there were supposed to be space hotels, there were going to be human missions to Mars. And year after year, that stuff didn't happen. And at first I thought, well, maybe people have lost the will to do that. And I sort of came up with this idea to do a mission to Mars to kind of get people excited about that stuff again. But I came to the conclusion that I was actually wrong about that assumption. And there's plenty of will, and it's really about making sure that there's a way. If people think there's a way to do it without bankrupting the economy, I think there's plenty of will. And so that started SpaceX to try to improve rocket technology and just to do as much as we can to advance that towards eventually, I'm not saying we'll take people to Mars, but we want to try to move things forward as much as possible.
What I'm fascinated by was you started out to try to get people excited again in space, and then you ended up with this fact. There are only 4 entities that have ever sent a space capsule into space and brought it back: US, Russia, China, Elon Musk.
Yeah.
I have a lot of really great people at SpaceX. Yeah, and we've got an awesome team at SpaceX, and actually I think one of the things that isn't recognized is that, there's way too much attention paid to me, and it's really, that's not right. I mean, people want to focus, they want to identify with an individual, and so that sort of naturally is what occurs, but there's a super talented group of people at SpaceX who make it happen.
You've done something remarkable in a couple of years, but can I just take you forward, let's say, 20 years? In your mind, what is your vision for humanity in 20 years' time, and particularly about space exploration?
Well, I think the thing that would be really great is to have a base on Mars, and to ultimately and be making steady progress towards having it be a self-sustaining civilization on Mars. And I think that's the most powerful thing we can do to ensure the long-term survival of civilization. And it's just a very exciting future, I think. If you imagine a future where we're out there exploring the stars, and we're a multi-planet species, the scope and scale of society is that much greater. I find that sort of view of the future really exciting and inspiring. And there need to be things that are inspiring. There are lots of problems on Earth, and we'll always have problems on Earth. But there also need to be things that are inspiring, that make you want to get out of bed in the morning. And having a bright future in space, I think, is one of those things.
I just want to touch on something that isn't talked about as much, especially about how Elon got there, is that founders and entrepreneurs have to have the ability to face death in the face, right in the face, and survive. To be able to start a company and not give up and put everything you have, your heart and soul, into that company to bring it to life. And one of the things that Elon did with both his companies is an incredible example of that in terms of what you did in 2008, 2009. If you could touch on that and tell that story, I think it's so inspiring, and it really exemplifies what it means to be a founder.
Sure, I can maybe give the short account of that time. And things were very, very tough in that 2007, 8, and 9 period, and even sort of the first half of 2010. And the low point was late 2008, because the first 3 launches of the rocket at SpaceX that didn't work. We had 3 failures in a row, and when I started the company, I thought, I'll make sure there's enough capital for 3 launches. But we managed to just barely scrape together enough to do a 4th launch, and in late 2008, that 4th launch worked, and that was our last chance.
But Elon, if that was the last chance, right? The company would have gone to the wall if the 4th.
Game over, yeah.
So what's going through your mind as you're watching that rocket blasting off for the 4th time?
I mean, how they say about like a white-knuckled flight. I mean, it was like, yeah. I mean, it was so tense that when it succeeded, I didn't actually feel elation. I just felt like stress relief. That's all. It was.
But having, I think this is something about founders, is having success and failure sitting side by side in a moment. Does it not drive you mad? I mean, to have to cope with that level of pressure.
Yeah, that was pretty intense. There were some other compounding things, because at Tesla, we were raising around in summer 2008, and then the financial crisis hit, and you had General Motors and Chrysler going bankrupt. So trying to raise money for a startup electric car company, in the face of that, it was like, I mean, people were angry that you even brought up the subject. And so we were only able to raise money from the existing investors, and I put everything I had remaining, and had to borrow money from friends for the Tesla financing round. And it closed on the last hour of the last day that it could close, which was 6 p.m. Christmas Eve, 2008. And we would have gone bankrupt a few days later.
And they all think it's an overnight success.
I think one of the lessons we can learn from this weekend here, Mark, is exactly what the 2 gentlemen are talking about. And that's to have a culture of not being afraid that something might go wrong, that something might fail. And I think for all the young people in the country who are our future, really, it's from a political perspective, it is to open the doors of opportunity and give them that chance to build their dreams. They won't all work, obviously, but it's to kind of encourage them not to be afraid to follow that, and if it doesn't work, that you start again. You've had the wrong view about that in this country for many years.
I think that's something you see in Silicon Valley, that there's no fear of failure. But culturally, in this part of the world,
true.
No?
I think there's fear of failure. I certainly have fear of failure.
But it didn't stop you.
No.
But I think it's an inherent thing, though. Like when Irish people have gone away and they've gone all over the world, they might try 3 or 4 ventures before something actually works in the way they want. But in a confined island, the tradition has been, if it goes down, well, that's it's a bad mark against you. That shouldn't be the way. And when I find going through the secondary schools and the colleges of technology and the universities, there's a different attitude, and that's inspired by people like what you do.
I'll touch on fear a little bit, because it's one of the things that I've realized is fear is finite, hope is infinite, and I think what's happened in Silicon Valley is that, as Elon said, we are afraid of failure, but it doesn't stop us from trying, because we hold on to the hope that we will finally actually succeed, regardless of the 3 failures that happened in those rocket launches. You were hoping that 4th would work. And I think the mentality has to be that failure is actually an option. It is an option. And in other places, failure is not an option. and that we look up to people who actually fail, but they keep going forward.
But it's also to listen to where a new venture might actually be. For hundreds of thousands of years, we measure the volume of timber by measuring the height of the tree and the circumference and calculate the volume. In Cork, Treematics have cracked this. 3D version, you can put the entire Mato Grosso on a computer and determine the value and the quantity of and the volume of timber that's there. It's a whole new way of doing things. Why is it that it's taken Elon, after 50 years of analysis on space travel, to be able to define and make a reusable rocket? We've had, America, NASA, Russia, China, Japan, Europe. Here's one that flies and comes back down and is usable again in a few hours. And as he said himself, it cuts the cost by over 100-fold, which is incredible.
Can I ask a question? It seems to me that in many ways, Elon, you relish the status of outsider. I think you're talking about how you're fighting to get this program, the space program, together, and you said it was like a little child wrestling sumo wrestlers. And I thought it was a great image of you as an outsider. Is there a sense that may come from an immigrant experience? So, the Irish immigrants went over, they fought against an elite in the United States. Both of you guys have been born in other countries. Is that a factor in a lot of the great innovators of our generation?
Well, I wouldn't say that I relish being an outsider. I really just, I'm agnostic as to whether it's sort of outsider or insider. It's just that, in the case of SpaceX and Tesla and Solar City, we're trying to do something useful, and I'd rather we weren't an outsider, honestly. I think ultimately, in order for SpaceX to be successful, it really has to become part of the system. It can't be an outsider for forever. And I think we're gradually getting there for example, NASA is our biggest customer. That's about a quarter of our launches are for NASA. We were launching GPS satellites and other things, weather satellites. And essentially, it's important to do useful things in kind of the Earth orbit arena in order to earn the money necessary to develop interplanetary transport technology. But being an outsider or insider, I wouldn't say is all that important, except to the degree that you don't want to compromise the fundamental goals and values of the organization in order to become an insider.
Sure. Do you think there's a sense that there is a sense of celebrating the iconoclast in American innovative culture? What defines a great innovator? What are the qualities you need?
The great innovator is not following the crowd, is not following trends. It's thinking ahead of the curve, is having the kind of confidence to believe in your vision and to never give up on that vision. The greatest innovators that I've seen in my life, and I've been blessed to work with from Travis onwards and friends like Elon and seeing what they accomplish, what you notice in them is that they have an opinion. They actually have an opinion. They have a vision of their own. They're not influenced by a lot of outside trends. And they're trying to force that vision onto the world and shape the world in a new way. And they have the courage to confront any of the fears that they might have in the path to make that vision come true.
Let's pretend Elon's not here for a moment. I know you're a very good friend of his. Some people do stand head and shoulders above others. I think it's fair to say it, Elon. What makes somebody like Elon Musk special, different, better?
I think it's much of what I said is that ability to say, I believe in this and I'm willing to put everything I have on the line. It's something that I've seen many entrepreneurs that I've been able to be blessed to invest in and do. It's something that I've had to do in my own life, is be able to say, here's everything I have and I'm putting it all on the table. And if you're not willing to risk everything, to again, face your fears, if you're not willing to do that, if you don't have the courage to do that, you can't stand up high and be someone that people can look up to and say, that's how I would love to live my life, both professionally and personally.
I would say it's driven by the power of imagination. It was Einstein who said that imagination is the greatest force because it encircles the entire sphere. And for somebody like Elon, to imagine something that's going to be different, and to have the conviction and the belief to actually follow it through, despite the naysayers or the cynicism. It is about making decisive moves and have the courage to follow that imaginative force, out of which may come success and may not, like his Christmas Eve in 2008. But it happened. But it's driven by somebody having a view, a thought, an inspiration, an imaginative quality to say, this is what I believe in. And whether it be, Jacques Cousteau or the sea so many years ago on the whole marine business, or the evolution of space travel and where we're going and how to get there, and the impact of that on humankind, it's driven essentially by an imaginative quality. The personality of the person carries that, followed by belief and conviction and really good people to make that become a reality.
And Elon, sometimes that puts you against the conventional wisdom. So I'm thinking now, while you were giving us ways to get out of off Earth and go and colonize other places and planets, you were also trying to make life better here. So the solar energy is a big focus for you, Tesla, obviously. How difficult was it to convince the United States, a public that is in love with the car, and we're talking about the gasoline-powered car,
Sure.
to embrace the idea of an electric car?
Well, it was tricky at first. Essentially, we're going against the preconceived notion of what an electric car was, which was kind of like a golf cart. So people, that was literally their experience with an electric car. So they're used to a car that didn't look good, wasn't fast, couldn't handle well, had low range, a golf cart. And so if that's the framework that people are coming from, then obviously when you say the word electric car, they're not going to have good associations. And so the first order of business for Tesla was to try to create a car that broke the mold, or really fundamentally changed those perceptions. And that's why we did the Tesla Roadster and did an electric sports car. So it had to be, in order to be successful, it had to be something that had some sex appeal, had great acceleration, handling, long range. Those things were really important to fundamentally change the perception. And it still took a long time. But we're able to change people's minds one by one by giving them a test drive. So like, here's the proof is in the pudding, here's the car, take it for a ride. And it was very slow going at first. If I had a sort of a dollar for every time someone mentioned Tucker or DeLorean, I would not have needed an IPO. So it was tough going in the beginning there, but I think it was just by making a product, initially just a demonstration article, and then going into limited production with the Roadster, and then going to a much higher level of production with the Model S. I think people's minds have gradually changed, and then this year with some of the toughest critics in the world are reviewing the Model S and saying it's the best car in the world. Consumer Reports gave it the highest rating they've ever given any car, I think this year really has been a turning point. There's still a huge way to go because the number of electric cars going on the road is tiny still. I mean, there's almost 100 million new cars made every year. There's an existing base of about 1.8 billion cars. So even if all cars were electric, all new cars made were electric tomorrow, it would still take on the order of 20 years to replace the fleet.
That car will sell very well in Ireland.
I hope so.
There's one for everyone in the audience, by the way. That only works if you're actually Irish and know the Late Show here. But when I hear you talking about the Tesla, it resonates with me what Steve Jobs used to talk about with the iPhone. The sense of intimacy with this, not just a product. And I've heard someone say that the Tesla will have the impact on personal transport that the iPhone had on telecommunications.
Well, it's kind of to say that the iPhone was a really great invention. I do think, just being something that Steve Jobs was that I think was quite admirable was he was ultra product focused, like down to the little details, and he and the other people at Apple would really try hard to have these, both at a high level and a small level, these delightful things happen. So the product was it just made you happy, and that's what we try to do with the Model S is just every little detail that we can think of
to really bring joy to the owner of the car. That's what we want to do.
And when can we expect it on the roads of places like Ireland or this part of the world?
Well, we should have the right-hand drive version in production in March. So I would imagine late March, April, that time frame. I hope there's many people who will buy it in Ireland. It would be great.
And listen, I can't ask you to come to Ireland and not give a bit of advice, perhaps, to the Taoiseach. I was tweeting out this week saying, anyone got some good questions? It was a great question from somebody which said, Elon Musk, if you were the Taoiseach of Ireland, could you give us 3 pointers of what you would do to make us, put us there on the digital frontier?
The digital frontier, okay. Well, I haven't really thought about digital stuff for a while, but...
Any frontier.
Any frontier. Well, I think that the most important thing for creating companies is you need a concentration of talent. It's like creating think of like a world sports team or something. You really want to focus your talent on a particular area, and that's what a company is. It's a group of people that got together to create a product or service. So in order to have a great company, you've got to focus your energies on a particular area, and then make sure that from a regulatory standpoint, and from in terms of regulations and taxation and government support, that it's there for startup companies, and that it goes from startup all the way through the medium phase of the company. Because where most companies tend to not make it is not so much at that very beginning stage, it's that intermediate stage. So they'll, can they sort of reach escape velocity as a company? And when a new company is formed, and you're going up against big established companies, you're trying to build some kind of credibility, and it's incredibly important that companies are nurtured through that phase. I mean, it's just like a little sapling growing in a redwood forest. You've got these giant companies. If you don't get a little bit of sunlight and nutrition, it's game over.
That's an important piece of advice, actually. As a small country, we don't have the resources to, spend on all the things that you might like to follow through. So we've looked at the areas where Ireland could concentrate on, like big data or logistics or whatever. And one of the things that is growing in importance here, Elon, is the capacity of many firms to mentor smaller firms and newer entrepreneurs coming through, to give the benefit of my experience. Let's look at where you're headed. And there's a lot of that going on. I think it's very true to say that the more you get them together, the more the challenge and the results actually come from that. And if you ally that to a sort of an openness to say, look, we're going to give you the opportunity to have a go at this. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we're going to start again. I think that's where the future. We have the best demographics of any country in Europe for the next 25 years. When President Clinton was here, he said, all these young people, they're actually going to short circuit the rigors that so many other countries had to go through coming out of a recession. So it's in there. There's certainly real potential, and I thank you for that. And if you're sending that spacecraft off to Mars, I have a few people I could put on it for you as well.
Maybe they could send it from Shannon. We could actually get SpaceX to Shannon. That was another suggestion I had from the Twitter machine.
Well, listen, this man, either of you are welcome here anytime. You've done very well so far. Elon, we're a different kind of people. Personality of our people has been all around the world for centuries. We're open, pragmatic, work very hard, not afraid of that. And I think the young talent you have in the country, really, the essence of it was here all week, speaks for itself about their imaginative capacity to change the world and create the future. And anything we can do as a sort of a catalyst for that is our responsibility to open those doors and let them follow their dreams and build them through to reality, as you have done and will do for the future.
Yeah, and absolutely. No, I was trying to think of, like, is there anything, what useful things can I say? I'm trying to say something that isn't just sort of a bland platitude. I think if for technology companies, you need engineers. So to the degree that there can be encouragement of that course of study at Irish universities, I think that would be really, really powerful. Maybe engineering could be like tuition free or something like that. So.
do you think, Taoiseach?
Well, but then tie it to, like, they got to stay in Ireland. They can't just bail. So it's like free engineering tuition, but you got to like hang out. You got to create your company here. I guess that's the kind of thing that I think would be effective for creating technology companies.
What do you think, Taoiseach?
Well, I think the whole area of third and fourth level education is changing. The relationship between lecturers and teachers is going to change because the student now has so much capacity in terms of drawing down data that they get swamped with it completely. So lecturers are going to be different kinds of mentors, drivers, indicators of where pupils' talent really lies. I think that's all going to change in the next decade with the MOOCs and the capacity of universities and colleges of technology with online courses that can be done worldwide. Lecturers aren't speaking anymore to 45 students, it could be 45 million students. And I think that's where the next big change is actually coming. But it's creativity and all of that makes a difference. Sure. We do need technicians coming from our colleges of technology. We do need engineers coming from our universities, and ally that to the world of academia and business, and you've got a thriving potential, put it that way.
Sure.
I'll add one more idea to Elon's. In the U.S., we co-founded something called the Startup Visa Act and started the Visa movement with Dave McClure and a number of other entrepreneurs and VCs. And the idea was really to expedite the ability for entrepreneurs to immigrate to America. And the thing about Ireland is Ireland has one of the greatest people in the world and one of the greatest cultures, one of the greatest brands. I would do something very similar as well, just do a startup visa here in Ireland, attract entrepreneurs to come here and start their companies in Ireland, so that you're importing talent on top of growing and homegrown.
Exactly. Yeah, like the tuition thing, I'd say make it free for anyone that wants to come here from around the world.
From all over the world.
Yeah, because you need that concentration of technical talent.
Yeah, we have relaxed the visa system. We give entrepreneurs who wish to come here, even with the right of residency, if they've got an idea and some capital, to be able to come here and get involved, if you like, in the energy that's coming off all of these creators that are in the country at the moment.
I'm sorry to say, Taoiseach, but I'd probably be dragged off stage now because it's gone way over. It's been a remarkable conversation, I have to say. An honor for me. Can I just ask one very final question of each one of you? There's so many people here tonight, but there's also people watching live, laptops and their tablets. And somewhere out there, there's probably somebody who has a great idea, but is kind of paralyzed by fear. They don't know. They don't want to take that chance. Could you just talk for a moment, Shervin, first of all, what would you say to that young potential entrepreneur who just doesn't know if they can take the risk?
It's a great question. We immigrated to the U.S., so we came from nothing really. My father was a taxi driver in D.C. and my mom cleaned hotel rooms, and all we had was the American dream. And I grew up just reading a lot of books and dreaming that I could be something and do something of value. And when I went to Berkeley, I started my first company senior year of college. And one of my mentors taught me that you should always ask, that the answer is always no if you don't ask. And as soon as you start asking, you actually get some yeses. And so I applied that in my very first company. When I first started, I had nothing. I was working at night as a security guard while going to school, had no money. And I read an article about a guy named Jamie Dimon, who's now the head of JP Morgan. And the article said he was fired by Citibank, by Citi, and he was in his office with his secretary and kind of waiting for his next move. And I was 22, 23 years old, and in my mind I was like, oh, he's available. I'm going to call him. And he's one of the most powerful people in banking and finance. And so I call 411, which is directory information, and I say, can I get the number for Jamie Dimon in New York? And they connect the call, and it rings. And I go, may I speak to Jamie Dimon? And someone answers, and the voice says, this is him. And I'm like, oh shit, sorry. Sorry, Prime Minister.
He's never heard that word before.
Sorry.
I heard that before.
And I go, so I knew I had like 60 seconds. I had to face my fear. And I said, Mr. Dimon, my name is Shervin. I have this dream for this company. And after a couple minutes of listening to me, he says, "That sounds really good. Come up to New York, we'll have dinner." And I did that, and he wrote one of my first checks as an angel investor, and that changed my whole life. If I hadn't made that call, or if I hadn't flown to Ireland to meet with Travis on Uber, those pivotal moments, you just gotta make that call, get on that plane.
You know what's happening
ask.
now? Everyone's looking for your phone number so that they can give you
Directory 411.
Elon, can I ask you about that one message to that potential entrepreneur waiting to make the jump?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think people should ignore fear if it's irrational, and but even if it's rational and the stake is worth it, it's still worth proceeding. I'll say a few of the things that some people may have heard me say before, which is I think if you're creating a company and doing something new, it's important to reason from first principles, which is kind of a physics framework, rather than reason by analogy. Try to get as much critical feedback as possible from friends, and you have to coax it out of them, because they'll be reluctant to say it because they don't want to hurt you, but they know what's wrong with your product. You need to get it out of them. So.
Yeah, thanks.
I think if somebody came to me, as they do occasionally, Mark, with ideas, I think I'd make arrangements to protect their patent, because that's always an issue. But I think it's about giving them the confidence and the courage to follow through with it. Because if it's inside you, it's a bit like in my business, politics, if you don't deal with that, you grow into an old person bitter at not having had the courage to go and do it. So if an entrepreneur, an initiator, or somebody with an idea, if they don't follow it, it's always festers inside them, and time passes by and they miss the opportunity. We have no days to waste in life and no time to waste in dealing with the problems that we face. So it's about confidence and courage and giving people the opportunity to follow their dreams.
I'm going to have to leave that as the last word, Taoiseach. And I want to say, I remember being told the Samuel Beckett line, that great line, he said, "Ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better." And that's what sort of keeps me going, I suppose, in many ways. So that's it for us. I just want to say what an absolute privilege it has been, on your behalf as well, to welcome Shervin and to Taoiseach and Elon Musk. Thank you so much for your time, your insight. And I think before we go, I think Paddy's going to come back up. And before he comes up, I actually chaired the first Web Summit 3-4 years ago. And by God, has it come on. And I just want to say that a huge round of applause to Paddy Cosgrave and the team of the Web Summit for doing this.
And then I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing. But first principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world. And what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true? And then reason up from there. That takes a lot more mental energy. And for batteries, they would say, oh, it's going to cost, historically it's cost $600 per kilowatt hour, and so it's not going to be much better than that in the future. And you say, no, okay, well, what are the batteries made of? So first principles would be to say, okay, what are the material constituents of the batteries? What is the spot market value of the material constituents? So you can say, okay, it's got cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, and some polymers for separation, and a steel can. So break that down on a material basis and say, okay, if we bought that in the London Metal Exchange, what would each of those things cost? Like, oh, geez, it's like $80 per kilowatt hour. So clearly, you just need to think of clever ways to take those materials and combine them into the shape of a battery cell, and you can have batteries that are much, much cheaper than anyone realizes.